My son left me at a quiet roadside gas station just after dusk. No goodbye, no hesitation, as if I were a burden he could finally set down. I watched his car disappear into the dark highway, my reflection trembling in the glass door behind me. What he didn't know was that the station's cameras captured every second of what he tried so hard to hide. My name is Helen Ward, 63 years old, and I've spent most of my life raising a son who learned to take more than he ever gave. We were supposed to be on a simple road trip, a last attempt to mend years of silent distance. The station sat on the edge of a rural highway, wrapped in the kind of stillness that makes you listen to your own thoughts too closely. I didn't realize, not yet, that the moment he drove off would unravel a truth I had avoided for years, about him, about myself, and about what love becomes when it's pushed too far. The road was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound louder than the engine. The sun was sinking behind us, soft and orange, smudging its light across the windshield like it was tired of watching. Ethan kept both hands tight on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I watched his reflection in the glass, hoping he'd meet my eyes, but he didn't. He hadn't in hours. Sometimes silence with your child feels peaceful. That night, it felt like a door slowly closing. The highway stretched in a long, empty line, bordered by fields the color of old straw. Telephone poles leaned into the wind like they were trying to listen in on us. Ethan answered my questions with the smallest words possible. Fine, yeah, maybe later. Words that didn't add up to anything real. I tried to convince myself we were just tired, but something else rode with us in that car. Something heavy. Something he kept buried behind the quiet. He tapped the steering wheel with 2 fingers. A nervous rhythm. I pretended not to notice, just like I pretended not to see the shadows under his eyes, or the way he kept checking the rearview mirror, like someone might be following us. I wanted to ask him if everything was okay. I wanted him to tell me something honest for once. Instead, he said, "We should get gas." The tank was half full. But I nodded, because confronting him felt like pressing on a bruise neither of us was ready to talk about. The gas station appeared like a lonely square of white light on the side of the darkening highway. One flickering sign. One quiet lot. Even the air seemed to pause around it. Ethan pulled in fast, sharper than he needed to, and parked crookedly beside the pump. His keys clicked in his hand before he slid them into his pocket. "You can stretch your legs," he murmured. Not kindly. Not unkindly. Just quickly. I stepped out, my knees cracking from the long ride. The air was cool, almost cold for that time of year. The gravel under my shoes shifted softly, like it was trying not to disturb the stillness. Behind me, the car engine ticked as it cooled, small, metallic sounds echoing in the empty lot. I waited for him to move toward the pump. He didn't. Instead, he walked toward the back of the car, slow and tense. Like each step was measured. Like he was waiting for something to happen that only he knew about. His shoulders were stiff, and he kept glancing around left, right, toward the road, toward the store windows. He didn't look at me. I walked a few steps away, stretching my back, pretending to admire the sky. But I kept watching him from the corner of my eye. Something about the way he moved, it wasn't natural. It was too careful, too practiced. Like he'd imagined this moment before ever living it. A slight breeze moved through the lot, brushing past my sleeves. The sky settled into that dim hour between day and night, when colors fade and shapes stretch longer than they should. A paper cup near the curb rolled lazily across the concrete, the only sign of movement. I turned around to ask him if he wanted anything from inside, but he wasn't there. The spot behind the car was empty. No footsteps. No shadow. Just an open space where my son should have been. My heart stuttered, quietly at first. I scanned the lot, expecting him to appear from behind the pump or the car. Nothing. The pump handle still hung in its holder, untouched. The driver's door was hanging open just a bit, enough to show it hadn't been closed properly. Inside, the dashboard lights glowed faintly, waiting for a driver who wasn't coming back. "Ethan?" My voice didn't echo. The night swallowed it. I walked toward the store window, my shoes making soft crunching sounds on gravel. The attendant inside was stocking shelves, humming something under his breath. He didn't seem aware that anything was wrong. I pressed my hand to the glass, leaning in to scan the aisles. No Ethan. No sign of him heading inside. Just silence. A silence that didn't feel accidental. I turned back toward the lot, the cool air settling heavier on my shoulders. The car looked smaller without him in it. The open door looked like a question. The road beyond the station looked endless. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the overhead lights, one flickering every few seconds, buzzing like a weak heartbeat. The sky above deepened to a muted purple as the first stars appeared, quiet and distant, as though they had seen this kind of moment before. I stared at that empty space beside the pump, the place where my son and I had stood together just minutes earlier. And all I could think, with a kind of ache I felt more than understood, was how easily a moment can become a memory. How quickly a person can step out of your life without looking back. And whether, deep down, he had been planning this long before we ever pulled into that station. The taillights were the last to disappear. Two small reds drifting toward the dark ribbon of highway, shrinking with every breath I took. For a moment, I thought the car might slow, maybe stop, maybe remember me. But it didn't. It slipped into the night the same way a secret slips out of a house, quietly, without asking permission. The air around me felt too still, like the world was holding itself together just long enough for me to realize what had happened. And when it did, something inside me loosened, not sharply, but like a seam giving way after years of quiet strain. The hum of the gas station lights filled the silence he left behind. A thin, fragile buzz flickering from yellow to white, tracing the shape of my shadow on the concrete. A shadow that looked more alone than I felt ready to admit. I didn't move. Not at first. It was as if my feet were waiting for him to come back, for the sound of tires returning, for the door to open, and for him to say, "Sorry, Mom." I don't know what I was thinking. But the night stayed empty. A soft breeze pushed against my back, like it was trying to nudge me toward understanding. I stood there under that humming light, feeling the truth settle slowly, painfully, like dust on a forgotten shelf. This wasn't a mistake. Not confusion. Not a moment of lost temper or impatience.
He meant to leave me. He chose to.
The realization sat in my throat, heavy and unspoken. The attendant stepped out of the store then, a man with tired eyes and a name tag I couldn't read from where I stood. He paused when he saw me standing alone by the pump, arms wrapped around myself without realizing it. "You okay, ma'am?" His voice carried softly, concerned but cautious. I opened my mouth, but the words caught. They tangled somewhere between my chest and the air. All I could manage was a small nod, though even I didn't believe it. He walked a little closer, hands tucked into the pockets of his uniform. "Your car, someone supposed to pick you up?" I looked toward the road again, as if the truth might change if I stared long enough. But the highway was quiet, only the fading echo of a choice I never saw coming. "No," I whispered. My voice cracked on the single syllable. He drove off. The attendant frowned gently. "He? Was that your son that left?" My chest tightened, a slow, aching pull beneath my ribs. Hearing it put into words, hearing a stranger confirm what I didn't want to accept, made it feel more real. "Yes," I said. "He's my son." The attendant's eyes softened, and for a moment, the buzzing lights and dark lot felt less cold. He didn't pry. He didn't ask why. He didn't look at me with judgment or pity. Just a quiet understanding I wasn't ready for. "I'm sorry," he said softly. 2 words. But they landed with a weight that made me swallow hard. The lights above us flickered again, buzzing in that uneven rhythm they seemed to prefer. The concrete glowed pale yellow beneath them, highlighting the small details I normally wouldn't notice. The chipped paint on the curb, the empty wrapper near my shoe, the long stretch of shadow behind me where Ethan had stood only minutes before. That shadow felt like the only piece of him left, and I didn't know whether to step toward it or away from it. The attendant gestured to the store. "If you want to come inside, warm up a little, you're welcome to." I hesitated. My hands stayed still at my sides, fingers cold against my palm. Leaving the spot felt like closing a door, admitting that he wasn't coming back. But staying there wouldn't bring him back either. I pressed my lips together, inhaling slowly, letting the night settle over me. The breeze had grown colder. The pump behind me clicked faintly as it reset itself, unaware that no gas had ever been pumped. "He didn't forget me," I said quietly. I didn't mean to say it aloud. It simply slipped out. The attendant looked at me for a long moment.
Not shocked.
Not confused. Just listening. "No," he said gently. "I don't think he did." And there it was, the truth I had been avoiding, handed back to me in a voice softer than my own. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something he'd explain later with a tired apology. This was a decision. Made in silence. Made beside a gas pump under failing lights. Made by my own child. The night wrapped around the empty lot, dark and endless. The stars above looked pale, like they were watching but couldn't offer anything more than distant light. I took one last look at the road he'd taken, a road I'd driven with him hundreds of times when he was a boy. A road where we'd shared laughter, arguments, music, stories. A road where he once held my hand from the passenger seat because he was afraid of thunderstorms. Now, it was just a stretch of asphalt with no promise attached to it. Nothing left to wait for. I stepped toward the store, feeling the gravel shifting beneath me like small reminders of a world still turning, even when mine felt paused. Behind me, the pump light flickered again. A tiny, stuttering heartbeat. The last sound marking the moment my son chose to walk out of my life, and didn't look back. The door chimed softly when I stepped inside, that gentle bell sound you only hear in places that never quite made it into the modern world. The air was warmer than the lot outside, tinged with the smell of old coffee and floor cleaner. David stood behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag like he'd been waiting for me to cross the threshold. "You can sit if you need," he said, his voice soft enough that I had to lean in a little to hear him. There was something tired in his face, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from witnessing too many stories that don't end the way people hoped. I lowered myself into the chair he pulled out. It creaked a little under my weight, like it remembered every late-night traveler who had ever sat there with their own quiet disaster. He set a cup of water on the counter, then a small box of tissues he slid closer to me with the back of his hand. "No questions. Not yet." The hum of the overhead lights blended with the soft whir of the refrigerators lining the wall. I could hear my own breath, shaky and uneven, like my lungs hadn't learned how to work without fear pressing on them. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure to whom.
To him.
To myself. To the empty space my son had left behind. David didn't respond right away. He just nodded, slow and patient, as if waiting for the truth to settle on my shoulders before I tried to lift it. "He left," I began. The words scraped against my throat. "My son. He drove off." The sentence felt foreign, like I was telling someone else's story. Something that happened to someone older, someone lonelier, someone less careful with love. "I saw," David said quietly. "I was behind the counter when it happened." A flush of heat crept up my neck.
Shame.
Not the loud kind, the quiet, sinking one that makes you feel smaller in your own body. "I don't know why," I said. My fingers twisted the tissue box without really touching it. "I don't understand." "We weren't arguing. We weren't anything." My voice trailed off, swallowed by the humming fridges and the soft rattle of a loose ceiling vent shifting with the air. David leaned his elbows against the counter, studying me in that gentle way only people who have spent years watching strangers can.
He didn't ask for details. He didn't pry.
He just waited for the words I could offer. "He's been distant," I continued. "For months. Maybe years, if I'm honest. But leaving me like that," I shook my head. "I didn't think he was capable of that." A pause settled between us, not awkward, just heavy. David's gaze drifted toward the back hallway. The light there flickered faintly, pale blue and restless. "There's something you might want to see," he said after a moment. His voice had changed, softer still, but with a thread of caution in it, like he was unsure if showing me would help or hurt. I followed his eyes toward the hallway. "Back there?" I asked. He nodded once. The security room. Cameras cover the pump area, the lot, some of the road. For a second, I thought he would immediately lead me back. But he didn't. He hesitated, a long, thin silence sitting between thought and action. His hand rested lightly on the counter, fingers tapping just once. Not nervous, just uncertain. I watched him, trying to read what he wasn't saying. "Is there something on the footage?" I asked. My voice felt small. David inhaled slowly, like he was choosing his words with care. "I don't like showing people things that might do more harm than good," he said. "But in your case, I think you deserve to see what really happened out there." A faint chill ran down my spine. The kind that comes when the truth is close enough to touch, but you're not sure you want to. "What did you see?" I whispered. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked around the counter, his boots thudding softly against the linoleum. "Come," he said gently. "You'll understand better if you see it for yourself." His voice wasn't unkind. It was careful, like he was afraid the wrong tone might make me break. I stood slowly, my knees unsteady from more than age. The room felt smaller suddenly, the aisles closer, the hum louder. As I followed him toward the hallway, I caught the faint scent of rain through the door we had come in through, like the night outside had crept into the store and settled in the corners. The hallway light flickered again, a pale pulse against the narrow walls. I paused at the threshold. David noticed and turned back slightly, offering a reassuring nod. "It's all right," he said. "You're not alone in this." But the truth was, I had been alone long before my son drove away. Still, I stepped forward, into the dim hallway, toward the door marked employees only, toward whatever the cameras had captured, toward an answer I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. Behind us, the soft bell above the front door chimed faintly as the wind shifted outside, a delicate, lonely sound that made the whole store feel like it was breathing with us. And in that quiet moment before David unlocked the office door, I wondered something that cut deeper than I expected. What was on that footage that made him hesitate? And why did I already fear the truth more than the loneliness I carried into that room? The room felt colder the moment we stepped inside. Not the kind of cold that comes from a broken heater, the kind that rises from concrete floors and old secrets. Only the monitors were lit, casting that pale blue glow across the walls, flickering faintly like they were breathing. David closed the door gently behind us, as if the truth might slip out if he wasn't careful. The hum of the machines filled the silence. A low, steady sound that made the hair on my arms lift. He pulled out a chair for me. I sat slowly, steadying my hands on my lap. They wouldn't stop trembling, no matter how tightly I held them together. David leaned toward the console, fingers moving with a familiarity born from long nights and too many sad stories. "I'll start from when you two arrived," he said softly. The footage rewound in a blur of motion and light until David pressed a button and everything slowed, then stopped. There we were, me and Ethan, walking toward the store. On screen, I looked smaller than I imagined, tired, hopeful in a foolish, quiet way. Ethan walked a step ahead of me, shoulders tight beneath his jacket. Even in grainy pixels, I could see the distance in his posture, the way he kept his body angled away, as if preparing for something. David pressed play. The video moved in slow silence. Ethan reached the door before me, held it open for a second, but didn't look back. Not once. Then he turned. Sharp. Abrupt. Like a man following a script he'd rehearsed too many times. My breath caught when I saw it, the way he checked over his shoulder, scanning the lot, the road, the angles of every camera he thought was there. My heart tightened. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't confused. His movements were calm, intentional. "Pause it," I whispered. David did. On the frozen screen, Ethan stood with his back half-turned, his face angled just enough for the blue monitor light to catch the look I had never seen before, not on him. Not on my son. His eyes weren't soft. They weren't unsure. They were calculating, as if he knew exactly what he was about to do. The air in the room thinned. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing. David glanced at me, his expression quiet, patient. He didn't rush. He didn't ask if I wanted to stop. He knew I didn't. Play it, I said, though my voice came out barely more than a breath. The footage continued. Ethan stepped away from the door. He didn't look at me as he did it. He didn't hesitate. He walked back toward the car with the purpose of someone carrying out a decision he'd already made peace with. My stomach twisted as I watched him reach the vehicle. His hands moved with an unsettling calmness, opening the driver's door, glancing once more toward the store windows. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't conflicted. He was making sure I couldn't see him. He thought he was invisible. My fingers curled into my palms. "Here," David murmured. "Watch closely." On the screen, Ethan leaned into the car. Then he looked up, right toward the pump, right toward where I had been standing only seconds before. He didn't see me looking back in this version, because this version was the truth without my imagination softening it. My breath trembled. Something shifted in me as I watched him. Not anger, not heartbreak. Something quieter. Something deeper. Recognition. This wasn't a moment of weakness from him. This was a moment of choice. And he had chosen a world where I wasn't standing beside him. My voice shook as I asked, "There were no signs?" Nothing that would have told me. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. The footage answered for him. Ethan slid into the driver's seat. He paused, only for a heartbeat, before pulling the door shut. And in that split second, he did something I felt more than saw. He exhaled. A breath of relief.
A release.
As if leaving me, there was the first moment he'd been able to breathe freely in a long time. The room tilted slightly, or maybe it was just the weight settling deeper into my bones. The video kept playing, cruel in its honesty. The car rolled toward the exit. Slow. Almost gentle. Then the moment he cleared the lot, he pressed the accelerator. The car shot forward. A blur of red taillights disappearing into the dark. David stopped the footage. The screen froze on the empty road. The silence that followed felt heavier than the video itself. I stared at the frozen frame. At the highway that had swallowed him whole. At the empty lot that had held me together while everything else fell apart. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I pressed them against my knees, grounding myself against the cold metal of the chair. "What else?" I whispered, though the words barely formed. What else did he plan that I didn't see? David's eyes softened. Sometimes silence is the only kindness a person can offer. He didn't pretend to have answers. He didn't try to fill the space with platitudes. He just stood there with me, in that dim blue room, letting me breathe through the truth I never asked to witness. Outside the office door, I could hear the faint jingle of the front bell, the wind brushing against it. A small reminder that the world still existed beyond this cold, flickering moment. But I stayed seated, staring at the screen. Because in those quiet pixels, I had watched a version of my son I had never met. A version he never wanted me to see. A version who didn't look back. And somewhere deep inside me, a new question slowly formed, soft, frightening, and impossible to ignore. If this was the son in the footage, then who was the one I thought I raised? The night air felt sharper when we stepped outside. Like the truth inside the security room had followed us out, clinging to my skin the way cold wind clings to old bones. David walked a few steps ahead, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting a thin path through the quiet darkness. The world felt larger than it had minutes before. Emptier, too. I kept hearing the soft click of the mouse in the security office, replaying in my mind. That moment the footage showed Ethan lifting my travel bag out of the back seat. So calm. So deliberate. As if taking pieces of my life was as simple as straightening his collar. The gravel crunched softly beneath our shoes, a steady rhythm between us. David didn't say anything at first. Didn't ask if I was all right. Didn't offer the well-meaning comfort people give out of habit. He just walked, slow, steady, like a man guiding someone through their own unraveling. The flashlight beam paused behind the station, settling on the dark shape of the dumpster. It looked bigger in the shadows, like some quiet creature watching the two of us approach. "There," David murmured. His voice stayed low, as if the night might break if he spoke any louder. My bag sat beside the dumpster, slumped against the metal like it had been left in a hurry. The sight of it made something twist inside me. Not anger, not fear, just a quiet, aching confusion. I stepped closer. The flashlight lit the dusty fabric, familiar, worn, stitched at the handle where I fixed it years ago. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like betrayal. I knelt slowly, my knees protesting the cold ground. My hand hovered over the zipper, hesitating. I already knew something was wrong. I could feel it. Still, I pulled it open. The hollow sound of the zipper in the quiet night felt too loud. The bag sagged inward, lighter than it should have been. Too light. A breath caught in my throat as I sifted through the clothes, the toiletries, the scattered remnants of a trip that would never finish. Something missing? David asked gently. I nodded. More than something. My fingers brushed the thin lining of the bag where a stack of personal papers should have been.
Gone.
The envelope, the one Ethan had glanced at earlier in the day, his eyes lingering longer than they should have.
Gone.
And the wooden box, the one that belonged to my late husband, the one Ethan used to open when he was little, pretending it was a treasure chest. The one that still smelled faintly of cedar after all these years.
Gone.
My chest tightened, slow and deep, like the ache was filling every quiet part of me. David crouched beside me, the flashlight beam steady on my trembling hands. You don't have to tell me what was in there, he said softly. I swallowed. I don't know how to make sense of this. The words felt small, fragile, like if I spoke them too loudly, they might shatter. He took the things that mattered, I whispered. He didn't take the money. Not the clothes. Not anything useful. Just pieces of my life. David didn't correct me. Didn't say maybe there was a reason. Didn't offer a kindness that would only feel like a lie. Instead, he asked the quiet question only someone who cared would ask. Did you know he might do something like this? I stared at the open bag, the empty spaces inside it. I knew he was troubled, I said. I knew he was hiding something. But this, I shook my head slowly. He used to hold that wooden box with both hands when he was little, like it was too precious for just one. A long silence settled between us, softened only by the sound of wind against the dumpster. What would he want with it? David asked. It wasn't judgment, just confusion. The same confusion that echoed through me. I don't know, I whispered. But even as I said it, a flicker of memory rose. Ethan's glance earlier in the day, the way he had asked me about the papers, the way he avoided my eyes when I mentioned my husband. Pieces of something I didn't understand. Not yet. David stood and offered me his hand. I took it, my fingers cold against his palm. Let's bring the bag inside, he said. No use staying out here in the dark. I nodded, though the darkness didn't bother me as much anymore. It felt honest. It felt like something I could lean into while the truth settled deeper inside me. As we walked back toward the store, the light over the pump flickered in slow, uneven patterns, a soft, stuttering glow that reminded me of how fragile everything had become. The bag felt weightless in my hand. Weightless and yet heavy with what was missing. I just don't understand, I murmured as we neared the steps. David glanced at me. Maybe the footage didn't show everything. The thought chilled me more than the wind. Because if that footage, that cold, unblinking truth, wasn't the whole story, then what else had Ethan taken? What else had he planned in the quiet spaces I never thought to look? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning of something I had never prepared for? I stepped back into the humming warmth of the store, clutching the empty bag against my chest, wondering how a son could steal the pieces of a life that once held him so gently. The store lights felt harsher when we stepped back inside, like they were trying to peel back whatever strength I was pretending to hold on to. David set the bag gently on the counter, as though handling something fragile. Maybe he understood before I did that I wasn't ready for what I'd find inside. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand hovering above the zipper. The hum of the refrigerators, the faint click of the clock above the coffee machine, the rustle of wind pushing against the glass doors, it all blurred into a single, trembling sound. A sound that felt like the world holding its breath for me. I opened the bag, slowly. Almost carefully. like touching the truth too quickly might burn. My fingers slid through the clothes, the folded sweater, the travel blanket I always carried. But beneath it all was that yawning emptiness I already feared. That envelope wasn't there. I stopped moving. Stopped breathing almost. The dread didn't rush in. It crept through me, steady and deliberate, filling the space where denial used to live. I whispered, barely audible. He took it. David didn't ask what it was. He simply stepped a little closer, his presence quiet and grounding, like a lamp in a dim room. My hands shook as I reached deeper into the bag, searching for the wooden box, for the familiar weight of it. It wasn't there either. A soft sound escaped my throat, not a cry, not quite, something wounded in between. The papers, I murmured. The property papers. From my childhood home. The words felt heavy, like stones I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. David's brow creased slightly, not from confusion but from the kind of sadness that people wear when they've heard too many stories that end like this. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer excuses or explanations.
He asked about them, I said.
My voice sounded distant. More than once. I should have known something was off. He kept circling the topic like he was waiting for something. A memory surfaced, Ethan's eyes lingering on that envelope as I tucked it into the bag before our trip. How he looked away when I noticed. How he changed the subject too quickly. The pain inside me shifted, sharper now. Not the soft ache of a misunderstanding. Something cleaner. Something closer to truth. That house, I whispered, pressing my palm against the empty lining, is all I have left from before my husband died. It's the only inheritance I ever had. The only thing still in my name. The silence around us settled like dust. David leaned against the counter, hands loosely clasped in front of him. He didn't pretend to know what that house meant. But his eyes softened in a way that told me he understood loss. Maybe not mine, but loss all the same. He took it, he asked gently. I nodded. He knew exactly what he was doing. The lights above us flickered once, briefly dimming the room. I closed the bag, hands trembling, and rested them on top of it to steady myself. David reached for the phone behind the counter, sliding it toward me with a quiet intention. If you need to call someone, he said softly, you can.
Someone.
Anyone. But the word felt hollow now, echoing through the empty parts of me. I stared at the phone. Call who? A friend who would ask too many questions? A relative who hadn't spoken to me in years? The police, who would want every detail I didn't yet understand. The truth tasted bitter. Who can I trust? I said under my breath. It wasn't a question for David. It wasn't even a question for the room. It was a question for myself. My own son. The boy I carried. The child I stayed awake for through fevers and heartbreaks. The young man I waited up for long after curfews meant nothing, had calculated the moment he'd leave me behind. Not in anger. Not in confusion. With purpose. What kind of person takes the last thing his mother owns? I whispered, more to the empty bag than to David. He didn't answer. He knew better than to fill silence that wasn't meant to be filled. The phone sat beside me, waiting. My fingers brushed the receiver, tracing the cold plastic. It felt like holding a choice I wasn't ready to make. If I called someone, the truth became real. If I didn't, maybe some part of me could pretend this wasn't the moment my world shifted under my feet. You don't have to decide right now, David murmured. His voice wasn't pushing. It was guiding, the way you guide someone through a dark hallway when they can't see the floor beneath them. I exhaled shakily and let my hand fall away from the phone. The bag remained on the counter, empty in all the wrong ways. A reminder of everything taken, everything broken. Outside, a gust of wind pressed against a glass door, making it rattle softly, as if the night itself was waiting for my next move. I didn't pick up the phone. Not yet. I wasn't ready to ask for help. Not when the person I most needed answers from was the one who had left me here in the first place. And as I stood there, staring at the hollow shape of my life packed into a single travel bag, one thought lodged itself deep inside my chest. If Ethan planned this, if he knew exactly what he was doing, then what was he planning next? The The phone felt heavier each time I picked it up, like the weight of it grew with every unanswered call. I pressed Ethan's number again, the plastic buttons cold beneath my thumb. The ring sounded hollow in my ear, distant, repeating, uncaring. One ring. Two rings. Then that familiar stretch of silence swallowing everything in between. I set the phone down on the counter, listening to the soft clack as it landed. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty store, a reminder that the only voice missing was the one I needed most. Behind me, the station clock ticked steadily toward midnight. Each minute landed like a cold tap on my shoulder. He isn't calling back. David moved quietly near the coffee machine, his silhouette softened by the warm, dim light hovering above the counter. He didn't rush, didn't hover, just brewed a fresh pot like he'd seen too many nights like this, too many people holding onto the edges of hope a little too tightly. "I'll pour you a cup," he said softly. No pressure, no pity, just an offer. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I could drink anything without my hands trembling. The store felt different now, the shelves taller, the windows darker, the silence closer than before. The hum of the refrigerators blended with the tick of the clock, forming a slow heartbeat that seemed to measure the distance between me and the son who'd left me behind. Another minute passed. Then another. I picked up the phone again. This time my hand didn't shake from fear. It shook from something deeper, something breaking quietly inside me. The dial tone rang. It rang exactly the same way. No variation. No breath on the other end. Just an empty hallway of sound that led nowhere. I ended the call before voicemail even kicked in. The truth was becoming too sharp to ignore. "He's not answering," I whispered. The words felt small, brittle, like thin ice cracking underfoot. David set a cup of coffee in front of me, the steam rising in slow curls that warmed my face, but not the place in my chest that needed it. "He might be scared," he said. "Or stubborn. Or running." His voice carried no assumptions, just quiet possibilities. But none of them explained the ache blooming beneath my ribs. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into my palms. It felt grounding, like something to hold on to while the rest of my world tilted. I stared at the dark liquid inside, still, reflective, deep. And with the silence thickening around me, my mind did what minds do when the present is too heavy. It drifted back to the little arguments I brushed off. The ones that ended in a slammed door or a muttered apology that never sounded whole. Back to the debts he never explained, bills that appeared with no story, late notices hidden under magazines on the kitchen counter. Back to the nights he disappeared without a word, returning home with eyes that wouldn't meet mine, smelling of cold air and choices I didn't ask about. Back to the times he said he didn't need help, even when it was clear he did. I took a shaky breath, the steam from the coffee brushing my face. Had he been planning this? Not just the leaving, but the taking? The papers, the envelope, the box, the part of my past he knew meant everything to me? Did he practice this moment in his mind? Decide it was the only way? Or had it always been a quieter plan, hiding in the small shifts of his behavior, waiting for the right night? The questions pressed against me, heavy and unwelcome. "He's been struggling?" David asked gently. I nodded, not in ways he ever admitted. But yes. "What kind of trouble?" he asked. I stared into the cup. I'm not sure, but enough that he stopped looking me in the eye. The admission stung. More than the silence. More than the empty calls. Because trust doesn't shatter in one moment. It erodes slowly, quietly, like water eating away at the edges of a stone. I felt that erosion now. In my chest. In my memory. In the space where my son's loyalty should have been. David leaned against the counter across from me, his presence steady, not crowding. "He took more than your things," he said softly. I looked up. "He took your peace," he added. I swallowed hard, the grief catching in my throat like a small stone I couldn't quite get past. It wasn't the missing papers that hurt the most. Not the box. Not even the abandonment. It was realizing he had made the choice long before this night. That somewhere along the line he had stopped turning to me and started turning away. The clock ticked again. Midnight drew closer, bringing with it that quiet hour when the world feels thinner and truths feel louder. I tried calling once more. The phone rang.
And rang.
And then nothing. No answer. Just the quiet confirmation that the boy I raised was no longer the man who drove away. I set the phone down slowly, letting the silence settle around me. Outside, a truck rumbled by on the highway, its headlights sweeping across the windows for a brief, bright moment before fading into the dark, like a reminder that life kept moving, even when mine felt stuck in place. David stepped closer, resting a hand gently on the counter. "You're not alone," he said. The kindness in his voice made something inside me soften, not enough to heal, but enough to breathe. I nodded, staring at the phone one last time. "He took my trust," I whispered. "And I don't know how to get that back." David didn't try to answer. Some questions aren't meant to be filled with words. The clock ticked softly above us. The coffee cooled in my hands. And somewhere on a dark stretch of highway, my son kept driving, carrying pieces of my life with him, leaving me with only the echoes of rings that were never meant to be answered. The night felt heavier once we stepped outside, as if the darkness had thickened during the time I spent inside the station. David locked the store behind him and walked me toward his car, the gravel crunching under our feet in a slow, tired rhythm. The wind brushed against my coat, cold and thin, carrying the faint scent of diesel from the highway. "You're not staying here," he said gently. His voice wasn't stern, just steady, unmoving, like someone speaking from the center of a calm neither of us felt. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to stay, wanted to sit in that little pocket of neon light and wait for a car that wasn't coming back. But waiting there wouldn't change anything. And David knew it before I did. Inside his car, the heater hummed softly, spreading just enough warmth to stop my hands from shaking. He adjusted the mirror, flicked on the headlights, and we slipped onto the quiet road leading back to town. The night stretched around us like a long, dark corridor. The headlights carved out small pieces of the world as we moved, illuminating broken fence posts, low brush, and the occasional glint of distant eyes watching from the fields. Neither of us spoke at first. I stared out the window, the reflection of my face faint against the glass. Older, tired, unfamiliar. The lines around my mouth felt deeper somehow, the kind carved by loss rather than time. As the road bent gently to the left, a question rose in me, quiet but sharp. What did I miss? It settled there, pulsing. Because something in Ethan had been unraveling, not loudly, not visibly, but I had felt it. Like watching the edge of a sweater come undone, thread by thread. Slow enough that you can pretend it's nothing. Fast enough that you should have known. I closed my eyes. The last few days replayed like scenes from an old film reel, grainy, dim, uneven. Ethan standing in the doorway earlier that morning, refusing breakfast. The way he kept checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. How he lingered near my bag, pretending to look for his jacket. The way his fingers trembled when he held the keys. Not from cold. From something deeper. I pressed my palms together in my lap. Every detail felt heavier now, tilted at a strange angle that made me see it differently. He seemed distant, I murmured. My voice surprised me. Soft, thin, worn down. David glanced at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. People don't get distant for no reason. No reason. That was the part that twisted inside me. There had been reasons I had brushed aside because I wanted to believe my son was just tired. Just stressed. Just growing older. But desperation has a way of shaping a person, even when they try to hide it. Especially when they try to hide it. When he was little, I whispered, watching the shadows flicker across the dashboard. He used to run to me whenever he was scared. He'd crawl right onto my lap without saying anything, like he knew he didn't have to. David didn't speak, but I felt the way he listened, patient, steady, giving me space to remember. Somewhere along the way, I continued. He stopped coming to me. Stopped letting me see the places he was hurting. The headlights swept over a row of bare trees, their branches reaching out like long, spindly fingers stretching across the sky. I swallowed, the ache in my chest growing sharper. He tried to hide it, I said. his fear, his mistakes. But it clung to him. I could see it, just not clearly enough to understand. David nodded slowly. Sometimes the people closest to us get good at hiding the worst parts of themselves, he said. Not because they don't trust us, but because they don't trust what we'll think of them. His words settled into me like warm water sinking into cold soil. What kind of trouble, I whispered, would make abandoning his mother feel like the easiest choice? We turned down a long stretch of empty road, the asphalt cracked and uneven. The lane lines faded. The car hummed softly beneath us, a low vibration that filled the silence. I remembered the nights Ethan didn't come home. How he brushed off my worries with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. How he started guarding his phone. How he avoided my hugs. How he grew too quiet too quickly. I remembered finding a crumpled bill in his jacket pocket, a debt notice with a number higher than anything he could afford. I remembered him snapping, "I'll handle it," before retreating into his room. I remembered the tired way he walked, the restless tapping of his foot, the smell of anxiety clinging to him like smoke. And I remembered this morning, the way he kept glancing at the road, like he already knew where he'd leave me. The memories twisted inside me, rearranging themselves into something clearer, something darker. He was scared, I said softly. The realization wasn't a shock, just a truth I finally allowed myself to touch. He was terrified, and he didn't think I could help him. David didn't offer comfort. He didn't tell me Ethan was wrong or cruel or heartless. Instead, he said the only thing that didn't feel like a lie. Fear makes people run, especially when they've already convinced themselves they're out of options. The road dipped, and the headlights caught a patch of fog curling across the asphalt, swirling like smoke around the car before drifting away. As we entered the outskirts of town, lights began to appear, scattered, warm windows glowing in the distance, like small lanterns guiding lost travelers home. But home felt far from me now. The town grew closer. My life, unchanged by this night, waited quietly for me. The house, the empty rooms, the pictures on the walls. Yet everything inside me had shifted, tilting quietly toward a truth I didn't know how to hold. We reached the first small intersection, the traffic light blinking yellow. David slowed the car. "Where should I take you?" he asked gently. I looked ahead at the quiet streets, the familiar shapes of buildings softened by darkness. My throat tightened. "I know," I whispered. I didn't know, but I needed him to hear that I believed it anyway. "I had no choice," he continued, words tripping over each other. "You don't understand. I didn't have time. They said if I didn't." The line broke into static, a harsh shudder that swallowed the rest of his sentence. "Ethan?
Ethan, who said that?
What did they tell you to do?" "Nothing. Just crackling, like the phone was being held too tightly or brushed against a sleeve as he moved." "I can't explain," he whispered. "I don't have time." A car horn blared faintly in the background. Footsteps. A door slamming. His breath shaking in the receiver. "I'm so sorry," he said again, voice cracking. "I didn't want you there. I didn't want you caught in." The line stuttered, then surged with noise. A burst of static, so loud I flinched.
"Ethan."
My voice rose without my permission.
"Please.
"Just tell me where you are." But I already knew the call was slipping. Fracturing. "Mom," he whispered one last time.
Soft.
Barely audible. Then the line went dead.
Completely.
Silence pouring through the phone like water filling a sinking room. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, hearing nothing but the echo of his broken voice replaying in my mind. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the street, that pale, uncertain blue that makes the world look washed out and unfamiliar. The birds weren't singing yet. The air felt colder, as if dawn itself was holding back, waiting with me. I lowered the phone slowly. My hands were still shaking. He was alive. He was scared. And he wasn't alone. They made him do it. The words wrapped around me like a tightening thread. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where he was, or what he had been pulled into. But I knew this. My son wasn't running from me. He was running from something else, Something big enough, dark enough, dangerous enough that abandoning his mother felt like a desperate attempt to keep her safe. I stepped to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The street outside was empty, still. But the quiet no longer felt peaceful. It felt like a beginning, a warning, a question the morning didn't yet have the courage to answer. What was my son running from, and would I have the strength to follow him into whatever shadows waited next? The sun broke gently over the rooftops, casting long, trembling light across the floor. And I realized the story wasn't ending. It was waking up, just like I was.